Hello, I'm Dr. Ken Landau. Thanks for watching. Let's talk about binge drinking. This is a serious preventable public health problem in the United States. It involves close to 40 million people. It's the most common, most costly, and most deadly pattern of excessive alcohol use in the country. And interestingly, most people who binge drink are not alcoholics. First, some definitions. A standard drink is considered 12 to 14 grams of alcohol. That's the amount in 1 ounce of distilled spirits, 5 ounces of wine, or 12 ounces of beer. They all contain the same amount of alcohol. It's considered that you're a moderate drinker if you consume up to 2 drinks a day if you're a man, 1 drink a day if you're a woman. And the National Institute on Alcohol, Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, the NIAAA, defines binge drinking as a pattern of drinking that brings the blood alcohol concentration to greater than 0.08 grams percent, or commonly referred to as just 0.08, within a period typically of 2 hours. That means for men it's about 5 drinks, for women it's about 4 drinks or more. So the pattern of this 5-4 drinking, frequently referred to as 5-4 drinking, 5 drinks in a man, 4 drinks in a woman, binge drinking is doing that at least once in the past 30 days. You have heavy alcohol use, heavy drinking is considered when you do that 5 or more times in the past month. The frequency among people over age 18 is enormous. 1.5 billion episodes of binge drinking will occur per year in the United States. That means 1,500 million episodes. And it's increasing in frequency over the period of the past 10 to 15 years, and it's affecting more the middle-aged and the seniors than it did once upon a time. And if we look at the pattern of this 5-4 drinking, it occurs in about 1 out of every 6 people who drink. And it's especially prevalent in those people who are between the ages of 18 and 34. And if we look at people who are less than age 21 who drink, well, most of them have binged on at least 1 occasion in the past year. And even more shockingly and scaringly, 1 in 25 pregnant women will binge while they're pregnant. Any alcohol at all, the consumption has typically been around 65% of the population who drink at least occasionally, but over the past several decades that has increased to about 75%. Now the number of binge drinking episodes individuals engage in averages about 4 over the period of the past month. The average number of drinks consumed averages about 7. And it's estimated that now as I mentioned, the somewhat older individuals, not just the young kids, are drinking. But now if we look at people between the ages of 25 and 34, about 25% of them will binge drink. And almost 1 in 5 senior citizens will binge drink. And 50% of all of the alcohol that's consumed on binge drinking is going to be consumed by those who are over age 35. It occurs more often among men than women. And actually, if we look at all of the alcohol consumed, about 80% of it is going to be consumed by men who are binge drinking. And it affects all socioeconomic groups. It's not just a problem here in the United States. It's a problem throughout the world. So the World Health Organization estimates in Europe the incidence of binge drinking is around 20%. In a population over age 15. In Portugal, about 20% of the people don't drink, and of the rest, about 61% will binge drink at least at some point in time. And among Japanese college students, the incidence of binge drinking is about 75% among males and 60% among females. And in Australia, they don't call it binge drinking. What they do is they call it risky single occasion drinking. And the incidence there is about 1 in 3 among men and 1 in 7 among women. And even more importantly, the problem occurs in relatively young individuals. So if we look at Australia, about 1 in 3 students who are between the ages of 7 and 11 are going to consume alcohol. They consume it in the week before the survey. And if we look at those youths who are 15 years of age, already 15% are binge drinking, 22% in people who are 17 years old. Now, if we define binge drinking by blood alcohol concentration, that already causes some problems, because the bigger a person is, the heavier the person is, the more the person's going to have to drink, the more alcohol consumed. So is it the blood alcohol concentration, or is it the amount that the person is going to consume? Well, binge drinking overlaps somewhat with social drinking. Now, with binge drinking, most people tend to drink more than they anticipated or intended to drink. They're surprised, actually, by the amount that they drank. And binge drinking isn't considered what they started off to do. Now, if we look at binge drinking, as I said, more common by a factor of 2 among men than women, more common in Hispanics than Caucasians, and in Caucasians it's about twice as frequent as it is in African American. It's common in Native Americans, but it's much less common in Asians, less common because of a genetic abnormality that prevents them from metabolizing alcohol. And when they can't metabolize alcohol, they have increased incidence of significant side effects. Now, unfortunately, heavy drinking has been normalized in women, partially because of ads and social media. They sell and combine alcohol with sex and romance. It's considered a normal method for coping with everyday stresses, and this is part of what they consider female liberation. It's the heavy drinking. And certainly today's young women drink more than their mothers and more than their grandmothers. The share of binge drinking in women has increased by about 40% since the 1970s. They're more likely to drink and more likely to drink dangerously before. Among women, there are at least 1 million emergency room visits due to the heavy drinking. Alcohol-related deaths in women between the ages of 35 and 55. It's doubled in the past couple decades. About 8% of all deaths in the 35 to 54-year-old female age group, they're alcohol-related. Women have a smaller body size, they have altered body chemistry, the blood alcohol concentration rises more rapidly, it stays elevated for a longer period of time. And alcohol makes women more prone to other diseases like breast cancer and heart disease and liver disease. Alcohol is more toxic to the brain in women than it is in men. And if we look at students, about 50% of males, 39% of females going to drink, especially at weekend parties, but now there's an increasing tendency for what we call atypical drinking. These people, unfortunately, seem to drink alone. They binge drink sitting at home. And among these people who binge drink at home, the atypical drinkers, they have a higher incidence of substance abuse and a greater incidence of other mental diseases. Alcohol in adolescence is unfortunately very common, especially because the adolescent brain is prone to high levels of novelty-seeking, thrill-seeking, and risk-taking behaviors. The reason that adolescents give for drinking is because it's fun, because they feel more sociable, they feel more relaxed and happy. They forget their problems. They fit in better with their peers, they believe. They have increased chance of sexual encounters, and it's a way that they alleviate stress. And if we look at high school seniors, within 2 weeks prior to a survey, well, about 20% of them are going to drink at least 5 drinks in a row. And the problem is also in college students. So it's estimated that among college students, binge drinking may occur in about 40% of individuals. But the colleges, they haven't adequately addressed the problem, unfortunately. And we have a major issue because about 9% of the college students who binge drink are going to drive. They're going to suffer from blackouts. And that leads to an increase in other problems. So more than 100,000 complain that they're the victims of alcohol-influenced sexual assaults. More than 1,800 college students are going to die this year because of alcohol-related problem, typically motor vehicle accident. About 25% of the students believe that their academic progress has been hampered by alcohol, yet they continue to drink. Now, among students, they tend to drink to get drunk oftentimes. They choose hard liquor over beer. For many, alcohol blackout might be the goal. At one of the nation's universities, Syracuse University, it was considered the #1 party school. So in response, the administration tried to limit the amount of alcohol on the campus, but then the students rebelled and labeled the campus a police state. Heaviest use in college has to do with fraternities and sororities. Now, most college students who binge drink don't think that they have a problem with alcohol, but it's sort of the norm. Half of the students drank before they got to college, the other half take it up while they're in college. Now, colleges don't think that it's a problem for them. They think education is their issue. Few colleges pay attention to the environment where there's cheap and easy access to alcohol. First large-scale studies showing that alcohol was a major problem in schools, in colleges, was done just as recently as 1993. And it's not just the high school students and the college students who have the problem. Even in the military, a study looking at 16,000 anonymous individuals showed that 43% of them engaged in binge drinking in the course of the past month, and on average, there were 30 binge drinking episodes that these people engaged in during the course of an average year. The total cost of all alcohol abuse in the United States is estimated to be around $250 billion, and of that, 75% are costs related to binge drinking. Close to $200 billion. And now we see ads, and ads for 6 packs of wine, mother's little helper. They say the most expensive part of having kids is all the alcohol you have to drink. And Urban Outfitters now has a wine bottle sized glass made for the less than 30-year-old crowd. And an ad for Smirnoff Ice type vodka. Well, it's among the top 5 ads, the most popular ads among young drinkers. The culture seems to be now where alcohol is fun. It's funny to drink. Well, the World Health Organization says we need to have some sort of control over ads for alcohol, just like we have over ads for cigarettes. They say the self-regulation doesn't appear to be working, but the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States says, hey, they have a code of responsible practices and they're very stringent in their guidelines. Yeah, they spend more than $2 billion a year to advertise alcohol. And the messages that come across from the Public Health Service, they're pretty ineffective. They're so ineffective that about 12% of binge drinkers are going to drive within 2 hours of their most recent binge. And 50% of the binges occur in either clubs or bars or restaurants, so they're going to have to get home somehow, and the average number of drinks is about 8. Well, what are the medical problems associated? Well, first of all, the alcohol, when it's metabolized, causes an oxidative stress inside the body. And that's going to lead to changes in the blood vessels, the endothelial cells lining the blood vessels and the smooth muscle cells that comprise the blood vessels. Going to cause the lipid profile to be altered. The coagulation profile of your blood is going to be changed so that your blood has an increased likelihood of clotting. Your heart has an increased vulnerability to arrhythmias. There's going to be an alteration of the amount of nitric oxide that's being produced. Your electrocardiogram is going to be altered. We're going to find changes on your electroencephalogram. Problem with your frontal lobe activity. You're going to have impaired working memory, delayed auditory and verbal memory, problems with executive function, impaired pattern recognition. You're going to have impaired impulse control. You're going to have damage to the white matter, going to have a smaller hippocampus. Actually, if we look at all alcohol consumed in the country, it seems that the binge drinkers are more likely to develop brain damage than people who are even chronic alcoholics. And that seems to be due to the altered release of glutamate and other substances from the brain that are going to damage the frontal lobes, damage other parts of the brain. And when you stop drinking, things can even get worse with a rebound effect. And there's another problem. There's always another problem. And the problem's with energy drinks. They're frequently consumed together, and it leads to an added risk. And the added risk is because of a decreased perception of being intoxicated. You have increased stimulation, increased desire to continue drinking. And unfortunately, the binge drinking is going to impair your driving and going to cause more risky activities. And that's more of a problem if you happen to consume some of those energy drinks. And there's a genetic polymorphism, so not everybody is liable to the same amount of damage from drinking because of the way certain of the alcohol metabolizing enzymes are created in your body. Well, there's a questionnaire, and it's called the CAGE. And the CAGE is a mnemonic. The C stands for cut, A is annoyed, G is guilty, E is I. And what it is just 4 simple questions. C, do you feel like you should cut down your drinking? A, have you been annoyed people criticize your drinking? G, do you feel guilty about drinking so much? And E, do you ever need an eye opener, or do you ever have to have a drink to steady your nerves or to get rid of a hangover? If you have a score of at least 2, then you have a good chance of having an issue with alcohol. But 50% of binge drinkers score below this amount. Well, what are the consequences of binge drinking? Short term, of course, you have hangovers. You can watch my video on that. You have nausea and shakes and vomiting and memory loss and problems with self-esteem. But then there are the unintentional injuries, the car crashes, the falls, the burns. And people who binge drink have a higher incidence of intimate partner violence and sexual assault, homicides and suicides. And then because you're not all there, a higher risk of sexually transmitted infections and HIV than for women who are pregnant. Unfortunately, the poor outcome of pregnancy, the miscarriages and stillbirths in men, and especially young adults. We have problems with traffic accidents, other types of accidents, violent behavior. We have suicide. Even in college athletes, there is a maladaptive lifestyle behavior, more fights, more driving while intoxicated. We have a problem with assaults. So it's estimated a considerable number of people who binge drink are going to be assaulted. And as a matter of fact, 1/6 of the individuals who binge drink ultimately are going to complain that they've been taken advantage of sexually. So we have 180,000 rapes and sexual assaults among those people who binge drink. We have close to 200,000 robberies and more than 600,000 aggressive assaults, all related to alcohol and binge drinking. And other problems that people tend not to think of. Or we have injury to the permanent teeth. We have dental injuries, increased risk of diabetes, greater likelihood of divorce and poor job performance. And the current and emerging science, unfortunately, for people who drink, shows that 0 alcohol is the best amount of alcohol to consume. It was said that, well, if you have a little alcohol, it's going to protect your heart. No, that's not true at all. Alcohol is a toxin at any level. Alcohol will damage your brain and brain function, heart and heart function, gastrointestinal system, your blood, your immune system, your skeletal system. And we know that alcohol drinking leads to an increased incidence of cancers. Cancer of the mouth and cancer of the pharynx, cancer of the larynx, cancer of the esophagus and the liver, and cancer of the colon and the rectum, and cancer of the breast. And even in the Nurses' Health Study, looking at those women who drink only 1 or 2 drinks a day, there was an increased incidence of breast cancer, and that increase is proportional to the amount those women drink. And alcohol leads to heart disease. So hypertension is increased by about 60% in people who drink. The likelihood of a stroke, bleeding into the brain, increased tenfold. There is the heart damage, the big blood vessels, the atherosclerosis, but also small blood vessel disease. Heart attacks increased. Sudden death, especially during the weekend among binge drinkers, and arrhythmias and liver disease, and hormone abnormalities, both in men and in women. And in pregnant women, there's alcohol-related birth defects that occur, neurodevelopmental disorders that will occur in the offspring of women who binge drink. So the child is going to grow with learning abnormalities, learning disabilities, memory problems, attention problems, problem-solving difficulties, and it's certainly possible, not unlikely, that in the offspring of women who drink, who binge drink, we can find some facial deformities that are going to last forever and be a sign that, aha, your mother was drinking too much while you were in utero. There are going to be some skeletal abnormalities, head circumference abnormalities, stillbirth is going to be increased. You've heard about the fetal alcohol spectrum of disorders. Well, that's what we're talking about. And the increased incidence also occurs in SIDS, the sudden infant death syndrome. So people who binge drink are going to have memory and learning problems, decision-making problems, going to stunt the growth of the frontal lobes, especially in youth who drink. Depression is more common in people who binge drink, and when people are depressed, they tend to drink more. It's going to lead to some impulsivity, especially due to the changes in the prefrontal lobes of the brain. Going to have impaired balance. In the lungs, we're going to find an accumulation of white blood cells. Certainly, there's an increased incidence of psychiatric abnormalities. We can even have acute alcohol poisoning that is so severe that the person passes out and then chokes or inhales their own vomit and develops what we call aspiration pneumonia. And if we look, compared to sober individuals, sober drivers, if we look at people who are 35 years of age or older who have a blood alcohol concentration of 0.15%, they have a 100-fold increase in the likelihood of being involved in a fatal crash. And if we look at younger drivers, even so, between the ages of 16 and 20, that increase in the incidence of fatal crashes is going to be 500-fold increased. And as I mentioned before, the incidence of binge drinking is increasing as people grow older, and the increase in driving while intoxicated, driving under the influence of alcohol, is increasing, especially in older individuals. Well, if we look at truck drivers, it's estimated that the likelihood of binge drinking among truck drivers is almost 20%, with 9% drinking every day. Well, according to that CAGE score, about 25% of truck drivers seem to have an alcohol misuse problem. And remember, that CAGE score underestimates by a factor of 2 the number of people who actually have problems. And then we have the incidence of death. The death mostly from motor vehicle accidents. So a third of the traffic accidents that occur in 15 to 20-year-olds are related to alcohol. Alcohol also causes injuries in cyclists and pedestrians who have less spatial awareness, less concentration. It's estimated that 50% of all head injuries in the United States are because of alcohol-related conditions. There's violence and suicide combined. They're the third most common cause of death in adolescents. And the suicide rate in adolescents who binge drink is 4 times greater than it is in non-drinkers. So when you look at the whole problem, we have a major issue. And the issue is with the way our culture deals with drinking. We think it's a sociable problem, but unfortunately, it so often gets out of hand, just like taking pills gets out of hand. People who drink, well, they don't think of themselves as having a problem. But you have to realize that binge drinking is extraordinarily common, and it increases the likelihood of acute problems, motor vehicle injuries and injuries in general, and self-harm, and certain heart-related diseases, heart attacks and blood pressure problems, but it also has delayed consequences as far as cancer is concerned, cardiovascular disease and hypertension in the long run, and neurologic problems. And now the Centers for Disease Control says the best level of alcohol to consume is 0. The old idea that alcohol was preventive from a cardiovascular standpoint, probably not true. So I want you to stay healthy. I want you to stick around so you can watch my other videos. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Ken Landau.